Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen and Pop Culture. A few months back, I did a video about the first year of Captain America comic books from, of course, the great Simon and Kirby. When I was doing it, I thought, might be kind of interesting to look at the early issues of The Guardian, and really the Newsboy Legion with The Guardian, since clearly Guardian was sort of an imitation of Captain America, done, of course, by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. And that's what this video is today. We're going to take a look at the first year of Newsboy Legion and the Guardian comics in Star Spangled Comics, starting with issue number 7 in April of 1942. Now, this is about 2 years after Captain America was introduced. And of course, Cap was introduced as a sort of a war hero about a year or so before we were actually involved in World War II. Guardian, well, it's World War II, but he's not really here to be a war hero for the most part. He is a police officer hooked up with a bunch of crazy kids. Well, let's take a look and see what Simon and Kirby had in store for us with this great strip. Our first story begins with Officer Jim Harper, who believes there is no such thing as a bad boy. He might be challenged a little bit at that. The story is set in York City, not New York, York City, and in the toughest part of that city, Suicide Slum, which is Harper's beat. Now, one day after his patrol, he is set upon by a couple thugs and beaten severely. And he says this is the last straw. Now note, all of this action will be shifted to Metropolis in the 1960s incarnation of the story. Basically, when Jack Kirby went back to DC in the 60s, he brought some of this stuff back, but now they set it in Metropolis. But for now, this is just York City. Well, since Harper lives in a superhero universe, the next move he makes is obvious. Fashion a costume from a costume shop and kick some butt. He does, of course, pay for the costume because he is a hero. Now, this is very much like Captain America. Jump into the action as quickly as possible. And that action is delivered in Kirby's Golden Age style, a little bit looser than he would be in the 1960s. Well, he's a younger artist at this point. But all the energy, all the vitality is already there. Well, the next day, the papers are wild with stories of this mysterious Guardian, and some newsboys in particular are interested. They're also short on funds, so when they decide to get some tools they need by breaking into a hardware store, they end up being caught by Harper. Now, the judge sentences them to an institution until they're 21. That's kind of steep. Harper jumps in to defend them and convinces the judge to release them. For their part, the boys are resentful. They don't trust cops, etc. The Newsboy Legion belongs to a trope that was big in the 40s and 50s, and which Simon and Kirby seemed to like. You also got something similar with the Sentinels of Liberty and the Boy Commandos. Tough kids from different backgrounds who are good at heart. The East Side Kids, the Bowery boys are a great example of this on film. Well, the boys go out and strip a car because they want to get some extra bucks, but that doesn't work. When Harper finally runs into them, they're singing for pennies in the street. But really, they were paid by some men to gather the crowd, to cover a robbery. They feel bad about that. The boys do. And they realize Harper is a pretty good egg, so they decide to help him out. They go to tell off the yeggs that paid them just as Guardian busts in to deal with the crooks. Great caricatures by Kirby of the bad guy, and typically great action by him. Guardian and the boys then follow the bad guy to the pier. He's heading off to visit his leader, the Big Fish, and that's who Harper wants. Leaving the boys behind, Guardian follows him to a lighthouse, but of course the boys do not stay behind. And it's a good thing. The thugs get the drop on Guardian, and the boys help get his fat out of the fire. The Coast Guard finally shows up because Guardian had the boys paint the beacon red, a symbol of trouble. The next day, Harper congratulates the boys and pretty much gives his identity away. All right. First story. Lots of action. The great Kirby art. Fun characters with a nice setup, and you could see why this became a popular feature. Star-Spangled Comics number 8 from May of 1942. The story this time is called Last Mile Alley. We open with the newsboys trying to figure out how to drum up sales, and they decide to split up and go door to door. Now this leads to Tommy falling through a cellar door and into the hands of Black Leo Lucas. Well, then we see newsboy Scrapper chasing a bully and ending up in the hands of Frisco, another crook. Same happens with Gabby, while Big Words is merely run off because the guys think he's a sissy. This ultimately brings Jim Harper into the affair, as Big Words tells him that the other fellas are missing. Now, knowing that people in Suicide Slum won't cooperate with cops, he takes on the guise of Guardian and goes to work. Dig this panel from Kirby, with Guardian tossing his shield at a gunman and knocking him off his feet. Great extension of the figures, and of course, we're used to Captain America doing that. Guardian does not throw his shield nearly as much as Captain America will at some point. He didn't throw it as much in his first year either, to be honest. Now, this is the Simon Kirby style. A relatively simple setup, and then lots of action as Guardian bashes his way through the underworld in search of the big boss and the missing newsboys. The clues lead them to the river and a boat. Guardian gets aboard and to the radio room, where he calls the harbor police. As the police board the boat, Guardian goes overboard with one of the crooks and finally learns the location of the big boss. But the crook turns out to be the big boss himself, who leads him to his hideout and capture. With his and the newsboys' lives on the line, Guardian does the only thing he can do, kick butt. Naturally, the newsboys join in the slugfest, and they all have a grand old time. And the final panel continues the question of the Guardian's secret identity. This is classic Simon Kirby. Again, simple setup, jump into action, always on the move at a fast pace. Get the junior sidekicks into the action in meaningful ways, and I like the way the stories end. Star-Spangled Comics number 9, June of 1942. The Rookie Takes the Rap. The intro lays this one out nicely. The loyalty of 4 boys, products of the crime-ridden streets of Suicide Slum, who with Harper's help have formed the Newsboy Legion to combat the evils of their environment. I like the emphasis there on loyalty, and note the mention of their environment. That's an argument that goes on to this day, but you get a lot of it in this time period. The problem these kids have is they're from a bad part of town. If we can do something to improve that, we'll have less criminality. So they're hitting on a topic that was really big at the time. Well, Sure Thing Kelly is the bad guy in this one. He runs a billiard parlor. That's the hangout for the toughs of Suicide Slum. He has gambling in the back room, and Harper stages a one-man raid, and it works. He brings the Kelly mob in. Now, the newsboys watch this as they're marched to the police station. They figure Harper might have had help from the Guardian. They think he and the Guardian are pals because Harper always seems to know things that Guardian alone was involved in. Well, naturally, Kelly vows revenge. And look at this caricature from Kirby. He often drew bad guys as being, frankly, distorted monsters. This is really impressive. Out on bail, Kelly comes up with a plan. He has a guy call the police and tell them Kelly slipped a $100 bribe to Harper. When the cops search Harper's pockets, they find a check. He's going to have to stand trial for corruption. On leave from the force, Harper wonders how the kids will take it that their friend the cop took a bribe. Love the character work here. He cares about their opinion for a few different reasons. Now, fortunately for Harper, he has another guise he can use to clear his name as the Guardian. So out he goes, hunting for evidence. While he looks for Kelly, the newsboys react to the news. Big Words thinks that he might have been framed. I really like that even though they're not sure, they all decide they're going to stand by Harper. So handing out papers, they come across some yeggs who celebrate the news and gather some clues. Specifically, that a guy named Dippy, who runs a lunch wagon, might know where Kelly is. They lure Dippy to a basement and get the info they want out of him, tying him up afterwards, but not tying him up very well. He gets loose to warn Kelly. And doesn't Gabby look like a young Richard Nixon? I'm just saying. Well, boy, Dippy gets his in the end. Simon and Kirby didn't mess around with depicting heartless killers. And, I mean, they don't pull any punches in this comic strip. For example, Scrapper gets knocked out a window and down into an alley after the boys are captured. Damn. The gangsters then take the boys to a cavern to eliminate them by explosion. The boys are not killed, but they are caught in a cave-in. But Scrapper survived his fall. He struggles to his feet and runs off to save the fellas. Really great show of heroism here. At this point, Guardian arrives, and they both team up to save the other boys. And now, Guardian wants revenge. A great series of panels in Guardian's beatdown of Kelly. This is top-tier Kirby. Well, naturally, Harper is cleared, and we get a happy ending. A couple thoughts here. I love how this story focuses on the boys. Harper does them a good turn in the first story, and now they pay him back, and not in a mercenary way. This is a bond of friendship that is developed. I think the inclusion of the Newsboys permits Simon and Kirby more opportunity for character work than they might have had with Captain America, and it creates some great story opportunities as well. I also really like that they're based in a particular place. Suicide Slum is their Gotham City, a place that can become a character in and of itself as they develop it. Star Spangled Comics number 10, July of 1942, the story, Kings for a Day. The papers announced that kids to manage city for a day. But the Newsboy Legion don't think this means anything for a bunch of slum kids. Harper doesn't agree, and it turns out he's right. Big Words has been elected mayor for a day, and his pal Gabby is the new DA. Tommy, however, isn't as thrilled to be the new commissioner of sanitation. With the kids supposedly in charge, crime czar Mark Mangle, known as the Mark, decides to pull some shenanigans, including busting a couple guys out of jail and committing a few robberies. It was pretty common for Golden Age comics to forego supervillains for crime lords and crooks, and this makes good sense in the context of the Newsboys and Guardian, who are street-level heroes, and again, in a particular locale. Well, once the boys get into their new jobs, they discover they're just ceremonial, which disappoints them. But when Mayor Big Words attends the laying of a cornerstone on a new building, the Mark's men strike, and he finds himself knee-deep in danger. Through a clumsy escape, he accidentally stops the crooks and becomes a hero. The same things happen to Scrapper, Gabby, and Tommy, accidentally stopping the machinations of the Mark. Now, this does not please the underworld. They want revenge and decide to get it the night the boys are to receive medals for their acts of accidental heroism. They strike while they're on their way to City Hall, knocking out Harper and kidnapping the kids. Harper then springs into action as the Guardian. Some great stuff from Kirby here as he climbs to the top of a building, tosses a boomerang tied to a rope. Guess he stole Batman's shtick. It goes around a flagpole, and then he swings into Mangle's office and into combat. Naturally, the boys pitch in, and Mangle and his mob are defeated. We end with the boys suspicious that their pal the cop might be something more, and it took me this long to realize the Guardian's shield is in the same shape as his police badge. So that's a nice little bit of symbolism. Not as much development in this one, just a fun story with a little character work and a good fight scene. Star Spangled Comics number 11, August of 1942, a story called Paradise Prison. Prisons with cruel wardens were a big trope back in the day. Prison reform was a hot-button issue, and that makes it grist for the comic book mill. In this one, our lovable newsboys are getting sent to reform school for burglary. But did they do it? It starts with the newsboys seeing a burglar robbing a store at night. The perp is Muggsy, who they thought was in reform school. Well, he was, but he escaped because the conditions were so bad. The newsboys decide they need to help the guy out. In the process of talking to Muggsy, the boys are caught by Jim Harper, who is disappointed in them. Gabby wants to explain, but Tommy stops him. This is how they can get themselves tossed into reform school so they can get the dope on what's really going on. Well, they do get tossed into reform school, and they meet B.O. Goodley, the warden. Shades of Granny Goodness, perhaps, in this character? Well, at first, the prison seems like a paradise, and Goodley seems to live up to his name. They even play a Superman movie. By the way, in the DC universe, there were tons of live-action Batman and Superman movies in the 1940s, way more than we got in our real universe. Lucky ducks. Harper visits them to see how they're doing. He's very disappointed in them and doesn't believe them when they tell him they weren't really responsible for that burglary. Well, soon they discover, though, the truth. The good treatment began when the newsboys show up. They find Muggsy in a cage, beaten and starved. The newsboys confront Goody while he's doing a radio show about the role of kindness in reforming juvenile lawbreakers. They put out a call to Guardian before the guards beat them down. Guardian heeds the call, busts in, and then busts some heads, and frees the boys from their cell. But Goodley isn't going down easy. Can you imagine? I think they might have trouble getting away with this nowadays. This would be considered a more adult comic book in this day and age. Back then, it was totally for kids. Well, in the end, they beat Goodley and end his career of corruption. The story, again, reinforces the ties between Harper/Guardian and the newsboys, building trust in one another and facing danger to save one another. Star Spangled Comics number 12, September of 1942, preview of Peril. This issue involves a movie being shot in Suicide Slum, and you know the newsboys are going to get involved, but so do gangsters. The story opens with a kid swiping bananas from Tony's fruit store and running into the newsboys. Scrapper pays Tony for the bananas. Nice bit of heroism there from a kid who doesn't have a whole lot of money himself. Well, they all pitch in to help this kid who doesn't have a dad. Mom is sick, has 3 sisters, and he lives in a part of Suicide Slum that even the newsboys try to avoid. The boys wish they could help everyone. But how? Well, Harper comes along and tells them they'll have to get the whole city interested if they're going to make a difference. And he's proud that the kids want to help. So how to get the word out? A movie. In the process of filming, though, they fall through a skylight and interrupt some gangsters ganging. Surprised, the gangsters flee, leaving behind their money, and they've been caught on film. So this sets off the action in the story. The gangsters try to get the film back and come into conflict with Harper first, and then with Guardian. I'll teach you to try machine gunning, kids. See again, machine gun. Simon and Kirby never slack on putting the kids in real danger in these things. When they finally show the movie, the film is blank. The crowd isn't happy, and neither are the gangsters who think they're about to be exposed. So they crash the party, literally, in a car, but Guardian stops the crooks and commends the boys for making the city aware of the problem of kids in need, and the crowd goes wild. Nice story, bringing up social problems, which was big back in the day, but of course doing it with a fun, action-packed story. And again, the kids, they're full-on action heroes in these things. They don't mess around. And if you watch any of the old Bowery Boys movies, East Side Kids movies, it's the same thing there. Star Spangled Comics number 13, October of 1942, The Scoop of Suicide Slum. The boys are going from hawking newspapers to publishing them in this one, another common trope from kids' entertainment of decades past. The inspiration is a lack of interest in the papers they sell, so they decide to print a paper specifically for the people of Suicide Slum. Jim Harper helps them with putting a down payment on a printing shop that's going out of business. Well, it takes a lot of work and some arguing, but eventually they have a paper called the Slum Sentinel. And note that front page. I have a feeling the guy with the $1,000 reward out for him isn't going to be real happy about this. And that is the meat of the story. Guardian gets involved going after the mob that Gabby wrote about in the paper, confronting them in a bowling alley. Naturally, they resist. In the succeeding days, they help put lots of criminals in jail. But then a new wrinkle, and one that gets to the heart of this strip. Big Words is offered a job at The Observer, and he takes it. The others feel betrayed, and it ends the Slum Sentinel. Well, soon the newsboys are missing their old pal, as is Jim Harper. But wicked things are afoot. Big Word's editorials aren't being published in the Observer. And the reason, of course, is they're in cahoots with the gangs. Big Word's overhears, they see him over here, and he has to run. He manages to get a warning into the hands of a copy boy before he's caught. You'll find exactly this sort of thing, again, in old Bowery boys comedies. What takes them an hour, Simon and Kirby do in a few pages. The newsboys read the warning and get the message. They go looking for Big Words, and thankfully Jim Harper reads it as well. When the newsboys get caught trying to save Big Words, Guardian arrives to lend a hand. In the end, it's revealed that Big Words suspected them the whole time, and the newsboys still suspect that Jim Harper is really the Guardian. Star Spangled Comics number 14, November of 1942, The Meanest Man on Earth. It is important not to skip the little opening spiel on these stories, where you get things like the rough and ready kids of the Newsboy Legion and the quick action quartet. Just really fun writing. In this one, a warmly human story with lightning swift adventure and pouncing peril. Who does that remind you of, that language? Well, he's working for a different company, but you see where he probably got it. The Newsboys and Guardian are taking on the meanest man on Earth. We open with the Newsboys at home, but not in a suicide slum hovel, but a modern apartment near Suicide Slum. How did this come to pass? Well, it starts with Mr. Wilbur Willing, who decides to do something about the slum. He has a plan, but he needs the people of Suicide Slum to put up the money, and he thinks the famous newsboys can put it over. The boys put the word out and raise the money and get volunteers, and they build a modern new apartment building. Sunnyside Center. Folks who helped are getting free apartments, and a local doctor is getting a new office, and there's a playground for kids to keep them off the streets. Only one problem. Wilbur ran off with the money to pay for all of it. The contractor wants his money or everyone is getting evicted. So we have a story about slum renewal, something that would remain a big topic through the 60s, the 1970s. Remember that Superman, in his first year, destroys the slums of Cleveland to force the government to build modern housing for people. So this was a big topic. This looks like a job, though, for the Guardian, and Scrapper still thinks that Harper is he. Well, the man behind it is Wilbur Willing. He splits the cash and ownership of the apartment with the lawyer, J. Will Swiper Hawk. The boys track down the lawyer and catch him making off with the dough. So into combat they go. Ultimately, they are captured by Hawk's henchmen. They leave the boys to cool off in an ice house. Well, fortunately, they have a pal in Guardian. He follows the lawyer and his men and comes upon the ice house, rescuing the boys and beating the crap out of the thugs. The rest of Willing's men attack with machine guns. Look at this action sequence, though. Is this not incredible? What Kirby could do. Naturally, the Guardian and the boys win out, and the lawyer and Willing are sent to the big house. It ends with this little ad featuring Scrapper, as well as the customary bit where the boys think they've caught Harper admitting he is Guardian, but he wiggles out of it. It almost seems like Harper knows they know, but he's going to pretend they don't, just for a laugh. Star Spangled Comics number 15, December 1942, Playmates of Peril, and frankly, I don't like the way this guy is eyeballing me. They're the luckless, lovable lads in this one, and our story starts on a perfectly peaceful day in Suicide Slum. No kids stealing apples, no problems, and this just doesn't make sense to Harper. Eventually, he comes upon a couple toughs who are plotting. The boss, Butch Baxter, wants them to meet at Ralph's Rough House. Well, since Harper can't do anything to these guys, they haven't really broken the law, he decides to skip his beat for an hour and investigate as the Guardian. And by investigate, I mean crash through the ceiling and beat the crap out of the hooligans. While this is going on, the newsboys are confronted by another gang. If it ain't the slum's slap-happiest softies, those are fighting words, and indeed a fight starts, and it is noticed that Jim Harper is not on his beat, so he's in trouble. Two things result from this. The boys are even more suspicious that Harper is Guardian, and Butch's mob are pretty sure Guardian doesn't know what they were up to, since all he did was bust in and just bust some heads. When one of the mob kicks around Gabby, he informs to Harper that they're pulling a job tonight, but Harper has no proof, and he's being watched by a sergeant as a penalty for being off his beat. So how can he become guardian and foil the crime? He tells Gabby and the boys to watch the mugs and see if they do something he can arrest them for. I notice here that Kirby's art is becoming more regulated in terms of the panel placement, and his figure work is getting better and better. Well, the boys do as they're told, even though they think it's a little fishy, but when they see the mob hit a bank, they take the law into their own hands and wind up captured. One of the gang they were fighting with earlier sees it and decides he better tell Harper. This forces Harper to risk the sergeant's wrath. He makes a quick change into Guardian so he can save the kids. And yeah, this doesn't make much sense. The mob just kidnapped some kids at gunpoint, so Harper can bring the other police into this one now, but he's going to go it alone. Well, either way, he finds the boys and a big fight breaks out on a playground. Comic writers and artists used to stage fights in interesting locations, like a playground, to spice up the action, add interest, create opportunities for bad puns, that kind of thing. The Sarge does end up catching Harper off his beat, but Harper explains that he was just arresting Butch's mob. I like the way they frame these stories. Harper Guardian helping the boys, and the boys helping him. Star Spangled Comics, number 16, January of 1943, The Playboy of Suicide Slum. Well, one of the boys goes hi-hat in this one, and you know that means trouble. It all begins when Tommy saves a little girl from getting hit by a fancy car. The driver is Willis Thornton, the banker, and he feels he owes Tommy a debt for preventing the accident. The reward turns out to be living in Mr. Thornton's mansion and being rich. But Tommy is torn, as you can see in this great panel. Tommy is the every boy of the strip. He doesn't have a gimmick like Gabby, Scrapper, and Big Words, so it kind of makes sense to put him, and thus all the kids reading, into this situation. Well, they all promise to stay friends, but sure enough, Tommy eventually goes, a little snobby on them, and they feel betrayed. But Thornton has a nephew, Melvin, who is not happy to see a potential new heir for his uncle's fortune. The boys overhear them plotting, but decide that Tommy is on his own. He has new friends, so they can take care of him. Ultimately, Melvin steals his aunt's jewels and tries to frame Tommy. Nobody believes him, and he knows he should have stayed with the gang. Harper tells the gang what's happened. They realize Melvin is behind it, but they have no proof. When Tommy comes back to them, dressed in the suit they got him, they forgive him and decide to jump feet first into the situation. Well, fortunately, Guardian is on the job as well, because the boys are led into a trap. Melvin owes gambling debts to gangsters, and he used the jewels to pay them off. Guardian tracks them down and solves the problem with some good old-fashioned fighting. The boys pitch in, of course, and soon all is well. I like how this strip has the crime-fighting angle, like other superhero books, but it leans just as heavily on the group dynamic and themes of loyalty, friendship, forgiveness, etc. It's really good stuff. Star Spangled Comics number 17, February 1943, The Rafferty Mob. We've seen a gang of mostly good kids in the Newsboy Legion. Now we're going to meet Rafferty's Ruffians, the most amazing kid gang you've ever seen. Our first meeting with them is when they stiff old Sam, owner of Sugarfoot Sam's Super Sodas, for a $6 check. The kid on the end kind of looks like an evil Spanky. They go on to disrupt a movie and pester Tony the fruit seller, and this leads to a fight with the Newsboys. Well, Harper scolds the Newsboys the next day, but then finds out why the fight happened. But he can't really go after kids unless they're caught in the act and committing serious crimes. It's up to the Newsboys to deal with Rafferty. They follow the trail and eventually find out that Rafferty is a girl. And not a very nice girl at that. And remember, you're not supposed to hit a girl, so what are they supposed to do about this? But this goes deeper. Turns out that a lawyer, Desmond Depew, is running a protection racket and using Rafferty's mob as a threat against local merchants. Harper confronts Depew, but he gets nowhere with the crook. This looks like a job for Guardian. Well, when newsboys, fresh from being chased by a girl, see Guardian climbing up to the lawyer's office, they decide to hang around. Maybe he'll need help, and maybe they'll uncover his secret identity. It's a good thing they do hang around, because when Guardian strikes the criminals, they pop a shot off that takes him down. Well, when the crooks carry him out of the building, the newsboys strike, Take a bow, fatty. It was the old days, what can I say? Well, sadly, the boys end up captured as well. Pretty common trope in this comic. But their leader, Tommy, is not among them. Desperate, he seeks help from Rafferty. When he reveals that Depew is setting her up for a frame, she calls in her gang, and they intervene to help Guardian and the boys. And in the end, Tommy ends up on a date with Spike Rafferty. Oh my God. Star Spangled Comics number 18, March of 1943. The Education of Iron Fist Gookin. Iron Fist Gookin, the toughest mug in Suicide Slum, is the focus of this issue. Fun opening on this one. In their eternal quest for story material, your authors sought one day to find the toughest mug in town. Gookin is tough, all right, but he wishes that he was smart. The slap-happy ex-boxer type, typified in movies by Slapsy Maxie, was a stock character in the 30s and 40s, well, and even beyond that. Well, in the course of the Newsboys selling war bonds, Gookin hears big words and decides he's the guy who can teach him to be smart. When he starts showing off his new vocabulary, though, Harper thinks he's gone nuts, and he warns Big Words that a little bit of knowledge in Gookin's hands might be a dangerous thing. Now, note the panel here. The deficiency I see in lots of modern comics is when they try to draw normal people in normal clothes doing normal things. Guys back in the Golden Age were generally very good at doing that and doing the superhero stuff. Well, Harper is right, of course. When Gookin shows off his big words to other people, Sharpie Pierce gets the idea of framing him as the leader of his own racket, since the cops are putting the heat on him. Gookin falls for it and is left holding the bag after a robbery, but he escapes, knocking the cops for a loop in the process. This brings Guardian into the case, and he busts into Gookin's apartment while the Newsboys are present. A slugfest follows, but just as Gookin is down for the count, Pierce shows up and creases Guardian's skull with a bullet. Basically exactly like in the last issue. The fight/capture/escape and fight again formula is often used in these stories, and Simon and Kirby use the same formula in Captain America. But it's a formula that works. In this case, Gookin and the boys are captured, and Guardian is left for dead. When Gookin tries to save himself and the boys, he takes one in the gut. That means it's up to Guardian to save the boys and clean up the Pierce gang, which is done with an efficient show of force. Thankfully, Gookin does not die from the gunshot, and the judge decides to sentence him to go to school and learn to become a useful citizen. And we finish the first year of Guardian and the Newsboys, with them still suspecting Guardian and Jim Harper are the same man. The next issue is a doozy, where Scrapper dreams that the Ratsies have taken over Suicide Slum. I wish I could cover it, but rules are rules. We're just doing year one. The Newsboys would run until Star Spangled Comics number 64 in January of 1947, with Curt Swan eventually taking over the art chores. They'd lose their spot in the comic to Robin the Boy Wonder in his first solo series in issue number 65. I would be remiss, though, if I did not mention Boy Commandos number 1, 1942, a similar concept by Simon and Kirby, but which also includes a crossover with the Newsboy Legion. You know, we all marvel at Stan Lee's ability to sell a story, but dig this. We are privileged to present this story because it was written by the greatest writer of them all, he who weaves those plots which make up the drama and comedy in the lives of all of this. We open here with the Newsboys visiting the offices of Detective Comics. We see the chaos of DC, and then we see our real heroes, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, planning their stories. But there's trouble. The Newsboys have just delivered the paper, and apparently the Boy Commandos have been killed in action. Why, the editors ask, weren't Simon and Kirby keeping a closer eye on them? So this is really getting kind of meta, isn't it? Well, how are Joe and Jack going to get the characters out of this one? Maybe they can pull the Sandman out of Adventure Comics. It's okay with Sandman, he's happy to help, and frankly, he thinks this is a ratsy trick. He doesn't think the news is true. So Sandman heads off to investigate and comes back with an amusing tale. And what a story. It involves wealthy little people, a guy called Agent Axis, tons of Simon, Kirby action, and of course, the boy Commandos come through. So we really only see the Newsboys at the very beginning of this odd little story, but it is still kind of fun. It's kind of cool that they did that stuff back then. In Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, number 136, March of 1971, the Newsboy Legion was reintroduced as adults working for Project Cadmus. They have cloned Jim Harper, and he is now head of security for Cadmus as Golden Guardian. This was written and drawn, of course, by Jack Kirby. A new Guardian appeared later in Teen Titans number 44, November in 1976, in the form of Mal Duncan. He would meet the cloned Jim Harper in an issue of Superman Family. Now, this version was written by Paul Levitz and Bob Rozakis with pencils by Pablo Marcos, inks by Bob Smith. So the characters created by Kirby and Simon, man, they really did stand the test of time. They would get later series as well in the 90s. Well, let's talk about this first year of the Newsboy Legion and Guardian. I wanted to compare it to Captain America and the work Simon and Kirby did there. And it's very similar, but the setup with the kids gives a lot more opportunity for character work and seeing, the friendship, the loyalty. You of course get some of that with Captain America and Bucky. It's a little more pronounced here. And so it has really strong themes, and I think it's a great story for kids to read. It teaches them some actual good values. And of course, action-packed as anything that Simon and Kirby did. Kirby's art is awesome. I mean, just the way he extends figures, there's a cartoonish quality, which he keeps, well into the 60s and 70s, of course, stylized, but cartoonish is the word, but he really makes it work. After all, these are fantasy stories, and that's what you would expect. So Guardian, to me, because he doesn't have the super soldier serum and all that stuff, keeps it a little more real, keeps it a little bit more grounded. No supervillains. It's all just, street criminals and gangsters and all that kind of stuff. You hit on some social issues of the day. It's a really, really good comic and deserves to be read by a lot more people. That, folks, is the Newsboy Legion with the Guardian, Year 1. Hope you enjoyed this little retrospective of this strip. Well worth your time to check it out and read well beyond Year 1. Let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, maybe subscribe, maybe share with a friend. That'd be very cool. But in the meantime, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. Read some Guardian, read some Newsboy Legion. Just read some Jack Kirby or Joe Simon. And I will see you again, hopefully soon, in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.